Hey everyone, welcome to our webcast here at ChangeNerd. I am here with the amazing Nicole Desaint today. Thanks for joining us, Nicole.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's get into it today. For those of you who haven't joined us in the community yet, hop into community.changenerd.com. Again, it's community.changenerd.com to see the full session or the full episode that we're recording today. So let's talk about what we're going to chat about today, because I'm so excited about this topic and you are such an expert. So we're lucky to have you talk about this today. We're going to really talk about this modern approach to change management. So really using design thinking to create sustainable change. I know a lot of people in our industry are thinking, I know about design thinking, or some people on this, webcast are thinking, I have no idea what that is. So today we're going to talk through what's the definition of, design thinking, how does it work? What do I need to be thinking about? But every single person today will walk away with some pragmatic methodologies and approaches to really create sort of this long-term sustainable change through a modern approach. So let's talk about who will be walking us through that today. Hi again, Nicole.
Hey.
Let me introduce you, because you have a very unique background and you are so fascinating. I love it. And I think a lot of our change nerds are really going to mesh with you and have similar or some similar backgrounds. Let's start with just your global perspective. I know you were German born, correct?
I am, as you might discover from my slight accent as I start talking more.
Yes, we
Hard to
love
hide.
it. Yes, taking that global approach. And then the other beautiful thing is that you have really deep internal HR executive experience, and you've also been external. You were with Accenture for a number of years as an executive in consulting.
Mhm.
And the thing that I love about your background as well is you've been in almost every industry. And I know you have a passion and a love for talent. So, that 20 years of experience, I'm sure you have, a specific
It's wearing heavy on my shoulders, as you can see.
I know. Let's look at your shoulders. What is on your shirt? Tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. Let's bring the human back to human resources is my sort of my
Yes.
motto, and has been, I realized, for really 20 years. So we can talk
Yeah.
about it more.
Well, and I love it because I've gotten to know you so much over obviously being partners in crime at Northwestern University's Masters in Science and Learning and Organizational Change program, or MSLOC. We're partners in crime in the DOEC program, so Designing Organizational Effectiveness Certificate,
hmm
which has been such a fascinating experience for us because we use a lot of design thinking.
Yeah.
But like you said, having all this experience, you've been able to be the founder of a number of things here in the Chicagoland area. So you were a founder of Disrupt HR Chicago back in 2016. You were also the founder of the HR Hackathon Alliance in 2019. And I know an initiative that's come out of that most recently has been HR versus racism as well, which really provides a space for HR professionals to really heal, operationalize allyship, and really design equitable workspaces, which I know here at ChangeNerd we're talking a lot about through these workplaces or through these webcasts. And then also, you're the founder of an employee experience design consultancy, Talent Imperative, or going to talentimperative.com. So, first of all, thank you for joining us with all of your experience. I'm excited for you to wrap this all up for us. Let's get into it. Are you ready?
All right. I'm ready.
All
Ready
right.
to rock and roll on a Friday before the holidays.
Yes, perfect. So let's chat about design thinking in general. I know based on
Mhm.
all of your experience, everything you've started, all the people I'm sure that you've met, and really done your own sort of research, I know you have this hypothesis around design thinking and why it is this modern approach to change. So talk to us a little bit about, sort of what is that hypothesis, define, design thinking for our viewers. And let's start there.
Yeah. Well, actually, maybe let's go back to this for a second, and share the story how I discovered design thinking. It was actually 5 years ago. I was working on a talent acquisition strategy project with a client and was designing a hiring manager workshop. And the CHO said, wait a minute, we have an innovation lab and I know they use some sort of a method. Maybe connect with them and maybe you guys can co-create it. And, sure enough, they, of course, use design thinking. And we ended up co-creating this hiring manager workshop. And I was just blown away by the method because I felt like finally I had a language for what I envision HR could also be. I mean, this was applied in a business context, but I saw the potential of it for HR. And hence the tagline, let's bring the human back to human resources. And that's a segue also to the definition for those of you who are not familiar with the method. My definition of design thinking is that it's a method for a method and a mindset. That's important. Method and a mindset for complex problem solving and surfacing innovation. And when we're thinking about the workplace, there's a lot of wicked, gray, big problems or opportunities, as we call them, especially when we as HR and change practitioners, we deal with people. And that's exactly the kind of sort of problems that design thinking can help solve. And one reason why that is, it's because it's human-centered. And so, we use it in my work at Talent Imperative to shape the employee experience. I know that's become trendy and another buzzword these days, but because of its human-centered approach, we really want to take a similar lens as we take to our customers, right? Customer-centric, user-centric, and want to apply that to our employees as well. So that's why we use design thinking when we shape employee experience.
Yeah, no, that's huge, and such an incredible, even just mental model shift around what design thinking is. Even if you know it, I think as you talk about it's a method or a methodology, and it's also a mindset. So I love this sort of exploration that we're going to be doing today. So, okay, let's get into it. So we talked about kind of what the definition is, what your hypothesis is. Let's actually get into what is the methodology that you really follow as we think about this modern approach to change management using design thinking. So walk me through kind of what the process is, the methodology is, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah. So my hypothesis, and I don't know how provocative it is, maybe some of you have already sort of used it that way, but I really believe that design thinking could be a modern approach to change management. And the reason why I think that is that, traditionally in HR for sure, but I think in general in business, we have sort of designed our little programs and processes, systems in our little ivory towers, right? And then we came up with a change management plan to push it out to the organization. And then we're surprised why it doesn't stick, right? That's old fashion, quite frankly, change management, right? I know it's like so many, like this saying, right? Let's bring the human back to human. It's so like common sense, but there's so many reasons, and I have a lot of empathy for the HR function. I'm an HR nerd, why that is. And similar, I assume I'm not a super deep change expert. I have some knowledge of it, but I assume it might be similar, right? There's just some things that we held true for so many years because it's the way we've done things. And being inside the function, we sometimes don't realize that there might be other ways, right? So we need to kind of explore other fields. And that's why I feel like design thinking might be a method and a mindset you might want to explore, because what it does is it brings your stakeholders along the journey as you design and iterate and then implement. So they're already buying in throughout the entire process instead of at the end, where throughout the entire design process, they were not involved. They maybe didn't have a say. They maybe they didn't even know it was happening. And so we used to do things to people. I think that's the difference, right? And design thinking offers a method to do things with people.
Oh, that's a beautiful phrase. I think, at ChangeNerd, it's so tough because I think also organizational culture comes into that as well, where it's, do things fast. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And we think that there isn't another method. It's do things to people because we perceive that's the fastest. Yet we know, what's that saying? It's like, measure twice, cut once or something, or measure 3 times, cut once. It's the same thing here, where if you bring people along and you're with them designing, that long-term sustainable change has a better chance of really being sustainable. I guess I'll just use the same word.
It also actually does, and that's a myth, if you will, of design thinking, that it will take longer. It's actually a myth, because to your point, yes, we might want to involve more people up front, so there might be a perception that it takes longer. But guess what? In the end, it will take less time for you to redo the work, possibly.
100%.
Right? So at the back end, all in all, the process will likely be shorter than what you're used to normally.
Yeah.
And and because of its iteration and things like that. So we've actually seen, HR teams save time to implementation of their programs while using, design thinking, for example, a 5-day design sprint, things like that.
Yeah, well, and even I know, you've done some incredible things, and I know the idea of the design sprint is out there. I know people, I've even used abbreviated, versions or small little, interventions in design thinking to generate hundreds of ideas in a
Mhm.
in a, a matter of 3 minutes. Where I think the old traditional mindset, to your point, is when we involve more people, it takes longer because people have this mental model of we're all sitting around at a table arguing about whose solution is the best when we're not even sure about what the problem is. So all right, let's take this and let's talk about, I know you have kind of, there's like three sort of pieces to this methodology. I know you talked about, empathy, or really building empathy and immersing yourself in an experience. I know you've talked about co-creating with your stakeholders. And then I know you talked about iteration or iterating. So I know those are kind of the three things. Expand on that a little bit more. What does it mean to sort of immerse yourself and build empathy? Like, why is it important? Same thing with co-creating with your stakeholders. And then also that last piece around, sort of iterating.
Yeah.
Um,
And these are also actually, mindsets that are similar in Agile. So if some of you are familiar with Agile, and I get that question a lot, what is the commonalities or the difference between design thinking and Agile? Very similar mindsets, by the way. So if you work in a tech environment, you might be familiar with that method already. The difference is that it has not been applied traditionally to a people context. So, your business might know it for software development, whatever, but they might not have thought about using it for talent, HR, or people. Um, yeah, so there's three sort of phases of the design thinking process, and each has their methods and mindsets. So the first phase is what we call discovery. And the mindset in that phase is really that of an anthropologist, or I'm a fan of Sherlock Holmes, really a detective, trying to find all the clues and trying to do that as, taking our own perceptions out as much as possible, but really being curious. So curiosity is that mindset, being curious about your users. And in our case, our employees or the users of whatever change intervention you're thinking about. So, and it's really trying to put ourselves in the shoes of each of the users at that stage, right? So doing a lot of discovery with them. We might use empathy interviews, for example, to really understand where they're coming from, what are their pain points, what are their needs, what are their wants. So really do a lot of and it's a qualitative method, by the way, design thinking is. So I always encourage to use data as well. So add quantitative data, but really, do your research and be curious and find out what really moves your user. And then, based on the insight from that phase, we move to sort of the ideation phase. And that's what's commonly known as design thinking, but it's just really one phase. And in that phase, the mindset is creativity. And that in the normal, you know, um, corporate environment, we really have unlearned to be creative. When you think about, when you were a kid, you didn't censor yourself when you drew this, strange Picasso-like painting. It didn't matter. It was creative. But as we grew up and we grew up in the corporate world, we started censoring ourselves and unlearned to be creative. So we really need to, and that's why we do a lot of icebreaker activities and things like that to get people back in this creative space to then, to your point earlier, generate a lot of ideas. So there's a saying in design thinking, in order to have one good idea, one must have many first. So we generate a lot of ideas and then converge on some of the best. And then we move to the next phase where then we prototype. And I think that term is probably the one of all the design thinking terminology that's the most alien in our space, because we can maybe understand what prototyping an app or a product might be, but how do we prototype an experience or an HR program or a change program, right? So, but in essence, what it is, and the mindset there is experimentation, iteration. So coming out with these small prototypes, which are lifelike facades of what the final product or service might be. So it's not a pilot comes after, right? So it's sort of how might we, an experience, for example, we might role play a new hire's onboarding experience. We might storyboard it. We might literally draw it out, things like that. And then, so we test some of the assumptions that we might have with the prototype. And the idea here is we don't want to make a lot of financial or human resources investment yet at this point. And that's the difference also between prototyping and piloting. We want to learn quickly what doesn't work. And then we want to fix it and iterate and go to a higher fidelity prototype till we then, are confident with the input of our stakeholders that this is really for now the end product, which then we can pilot, launch, and implement.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think even talking about these mental models or these mindsets and giving people a new sort of blueprint or a buffet of options to try even just one thing that's new as you think about the traditional change management process or
Right.
project management process, which people often sort of pepper in and use those terms synonymously. And we know they're totally two separate disciplines. So let's talk a little bit more pragmatically about each. I love the description around, building empathy and really immersing yourself and then really thinking about co-creating with your stakeholders. And then really kind of this idea of like, now we need to iterate and go through it. So we've gathered all this data. It's like, how do we do that? You immerse yourself in an experience. How do we do that? We're taking all these things that said co-create with stakeholders. It's like, how do we do that? And then how do we get people to even buy in to say, yes, let's iterate, let's try something new, when a lot of these concepts, right, to use your word earlier, really alien. And I know a lot of people, especially in the HR space or just people and humans in general, if they can't see it, sometimes they're not willing to dip their toe in. So it's like, how do you get people to start this process? And then give us some like pragmatic approaches. Like, what can we do to get this process started?
And so I actually have my own podcast. It's called Talent Tales, where I interview leaders, HR leaders who have brought design thinking to their HR practice. And that's actually a question I asked is, what are the barriers? And so pulling from the answers from them, and how did they overcome the barriers? So some of the conclusions are, don't necessarily call it like this design thinking thing, right? And that in change, that sometimes it's all about the packaging. So to your point, maybe pick one, aspect of the method and integrate it into what you already do. And don't even talk about it. Just choose it because it might address the problem you're trying to solve and start from there. So, right. So that's a way you can sort of use it. And then the experience is people love it. And then they say, oh, remember you did this the other day? Can you do this again? Mm-hmm. So that's what I hear a lot. It's sort of this undercover a little bit. And then grassroots requests come in because it works. It's a method that's been used since the 90s, not in HR, but in general. And it's a scientifically proven method, right? So it just works. And so people start seeing the benefit and they come back for it, even though they might not know what it's called. And it doesn't really matter. I'm really pragmatic about it. I'm not like an idealist when it comes to any method, quite frankly. I'm a proponent of whatever works. So, try something, plug it in. And I always counsel, start with yourself, right? So how might you change some of your own mindsets? Where might be your own strengths and weaknesses in what I just described in the mindsets, and then practice yourself. Then try something on your team. For example, in your next team meeting, could you do a little 5-minute ideation activity? See how that goes. And then, as I said, integrate it into a project. So those are some ways. And another way that I hear is, so small wins, small projects, build from there, build momentum from there. Another one is if design thinking is already used in the business, by the business. So for example, I shared the example of a design sprint where I worked with a tech company, and the CEO, when we pitched it to him, we said, we're going to do a sprint just with talent. And he's like, oh, okay. It was like the easiest sales pitch because they use the sprint method already on the software development side, right? So where might be pockets in your business where they already know, or they might know Agile, they just haven't thought about, their business leaders or tech leaders, right? So they haven't thought about applying it in a change or talent or HR context. But then bridging that is easier than if you have to convince somebody of the method. So undercover, grassroots, and finding your champions would be.
I love that. And it's so fascinating. You're practicing what you preach. You're using design thinking to do design thinking. Start with one little thing, test it out, prototype, see if it works,
exactly.
Try something else before you actually, I should say, iterate before you actually prototype. So I love that. And
exactly.
Yeah. And I think too, let's sort of shift gears a little bit and talk about, there's so many changes that are going on within the organization. Obviously, you have your podcast, Talent Tales, which is amazing. And you ask people, how do we actually affect change or do things differently using design thinking? What are for you, some of the best stories or the most, provocative stories that you've heard that really align with this, methodology? Just to give people some examples. Like, it's great to think about, pragmatic approaches and theories and do an iteration activity, but like, what does it look like in real life? Like, give us kind of a story or an example.
Hmm. Yeah, I think so one story I can share because it's published. It's one of our clients. It's Arity. They're a tech spin-off of Allstate. And they did that sprint about the new hire's first day experience. So, they're a tech company that, like many tech companies, they spend a lot of money and effort and resources in finding these great people. So they want to make sure when they join from day one, they feel welcome and productive, right? So that's when we did a design sprint to really identify, and we brought in actually recent new hires in our research phase, so to talk and talk to them, identified their pain points, and then went through all the phases of design thinking, ending with actually testing a prototype. So then we invited back sort of recent former new hires and had them walk through the process as though they were new hires again. So really putting themselves back in the shoes of them being new hires, but it was recent enough so they could remember. And so the result was a tester prototype, which then they were able to implement a revised onboarding program within 8 weeks after that, which is like unknown, I think, in the HR and change world, right? So, and that's just shows how like little activities like that, by bringing in people, and it wasn't even the entire company that needed to participate. In a sprint, you have 7 people, but then you bring in stakeholders to become co-designers where needed. And then again, it's a prototype. So it's understood that still you will continue to iterate as you go, and bring in more people to really validate it before you implement. So that's an example applied to the onboarding experience. And I know quite a few now use it in the DEI space, and even use sort of the hackathon, HR hackathon method that we designed for the HR Hackathon Alliance, and applying that in the DEI context, but also for employee engagement. I've seen that, right? So companies have done all their engagement surveys, and that's, by the way, another big change mess usually. And I was an HR leader who was responsible for that process, so I know, right? We gather all this great data, and then what happens? Sometimes nothing, or leaders don't know what to do with the results, or they're, shocked by the results and things like that, right? So now I've seen companies using the themes that came out of the employee engagement survey and using HR hackathons with the employees to come up with actions, and then make it maybe a little competition, the best ideas win a prize, or get a project launched where they can become members and things like that. So I think in a way it's a tool to engage employees, but it's also a change tool.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And I have been a part of a couple of your hackathons, and they've just been incredible. I think the thing that I love about what we're talking about here in design thinking, and these mindsets and the mindset shifts, and these really pragmatic approaches and methodologies and tactics and things that you can deploy now, are that they're so translatable. As long as you can define, right, the problem that you're trying to solve so clearly. And I know, we at Northwestern, and then obviously through HR Hackathon and a number of things, we use the how might we method, right? Like, how might we? And that becomes our research question. And as long as we can align on that, there's such a buffet of opportunities and options, that many that you shared today, that we can utilize to create such a much more sustainable solution. And design thinking can really be overlapped, or how I'd say paralleled, right? Or overlaid on top of, change management processes. So it's just incredible. I'm so excited. What else, and kind of closing up today, what else, when you think about our ChangeNerd community, you think about executives, you think about our independent practitioners or people in private practice, and then you think about people who are like doing this change every day internally. I know you mentioned EDI, but what at the end of the day do people really need to know about design thinking, or is there another example that you would give to sort of highlight that um, advice?
Yeah, yeah, a couple of things. So one, again, going back to this, I think this is something
I'm going to get that
everybody
shirt
should get the
now.
shirt. No, to keep that, if you keep that front and center, it's about the human and really grounding yourself around everything that you do. Does it serve the human purpose? Right? And what are the needs and pain points of the human you're trying to solve for? I think if you ground yourself, and it doesn't matter the method you use, that core mindset, I think, will drive a lot. And then you mentioned the other point about the buffet of methods, and I appreciate that because I see the two as complementary as well. For example, one method we use, or one tool, is it's called Stakeholder Mapping, and it's done at the very beginning, and it's literally mapping out on a whiteboard, or now a virtual whiteboard, all the stakeholders in your ecosystem, and do it as a workshop. And my experience is it brings out so many more stakeholders than previously we might have forgotten in a traditional, who are our stakeholders, because it creates a much broader map. And then if you use that common understanding of the ecosystem and all the stakeholders involved, then you can create meaningful change plans and stakeholder engagement plans, right? But to have a workshop with people who from different departments to align on really who our stakeholders and users are is such a valuable initiative. And then to your point, then from there maybe derive the how might we, and how might we tackle the challenges that they're facing using all kinds of methods.
Totally. Thank you, Nicole, for joining us today.
Thanks for
I
having me.
know, absolutely. And again, we'll remember keeping the human at the center of human resources in all of our designs, and bringing human back to human resources, I should say, in our people and culture initiatives. If you all who are listening today want to learn more from Nicole, and with Nicole, I should say, to use design thinking methodologies and terminology, you can connect with her on LinkedIn. It's Nicole Desain, Dessain. You can also check out a couple of her websites that she has from a number of the entities that she has founded and is a part of currently. You can go to HR Hackathon Alliance.com if you're interested in kind of the HR Hackathon, sort of method. You can also go to the hrversusracism.org, which was an initiative that was born out of the HR Hackathon Alliance. Or you can check out talentimperative.com, which is really where Nicole does a lot of her best and most exciting and fascinating design consultancy work. So thank you again, Nicole. For those of you who are also listening, I know I said this in the beginning, if you are not a change nerd yet, hop to community.changenerd.com. Again, it's community.changenerd.com, and join our community where our values are really living out, being provocative, asking the questions that people don't ask, really bringing sort of that implicit and tacit knowledge to the forefront and making it explicit with each other, really thinking about having high integrable experiences through excellence. And then also, last but not least, our key and core value is around community. So Nicole, thank you for being a part of our change community.
Thanks, Change Nerds.
We'll see you all very soon.